Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of his standalones, or currently standalones. This is a high fantasy, epic fantasy, political fantasy, kind of a lot of different subgenres, again, as most of his books fall under. Warbreaker is one of the books in the Cosmere. It's currently a standalone, although there are plans for future books in the series. There are a lot of people that place this as their favorite book in the Cosmere, or one of their top favorites for sure, and while I enjoy it quite a bit, it is not my favorite. This was a reread for me that I am talking about this, reviewing this from, and that undoubtedly has affected my opinions of this book, which is how a reread should to some degree do. And the first time I read it, although the process of reading it wasn't really my favorite, I found myself thinking back to it for months afterwards, just contemplating this book, contemplating what Sanderson was doing, even down to things like the magic system and all that sort of stuff. This hasn't really been the case since my reread of it on this time. I finished it about 2 weeks ago, if I remember correctly, and so it's still fairly fresh in my mind in terms of the story itself, but I don't find myself looking back to it and thinking about it and thinking about what it was doing and thinking about all these things about the story. At least not in the same way as I did that on that first read. There is a ton for me to love in this book. Of course, the magic system here is one of my favorites. I've mentioned it several times, but anything that is light or color-based magic system it automatically has a draw for me where I end up enjoying those aspects of the magic because for some reason that aesthetic I just really am attracted to. I really like that aesthetic. And that is no different here. The biochromatic breaths and the way that they stack to reach greater heightenings is super interesting to me, and the abilities they bestow the more breaths that you have is really cool. So that is really the first major draw to this story for me. The second and arguably more important part is that of the characters, or rather the characters' stories in this instance, because the characters themselves aren't really my top favorite Cosmere characters or anything like that. Neither Ciri nor Vivenna are among my favorite Cosmere characters, although I do like Susebron and Vasher. Those two characters I would put pretty high in my ranking. But Ciri and Vivenna's stories are really what made me enjoy this book as much as I do. They're basically complete opposites in terms of their characters at the beginning of the book. But their stories do something super interesting, at least it's interesting in my opinion, and I can't really think of another time that I've seen it happen. Maybe I have in other books and other stories, but I can't specifically think of another one off the top of my head. And that is that they mirror each other or run parallel to each other, except that they are going in opposite directions. And that's really interesting to me, having the two stories that are very similar in some aspects, except that they're opposites. And again, I'm sure this does happen in other books, and maybe I'm just not thinking of a good example off the top of my head, but I can't think of another story where that is as prominent to the characters' stories as it is in this book. And it's weird though, because the sister that I start out the book liking more doesn't end up in that place. I end up liking the other sister more at the end of the story. Both the characters have to learn this new world, and both are forced to do things and become things that they are completely uncomfortable with. And neither could truly succeed if they were in the other person's position. And I find that and Sanderson's execution of it fascinating. Of course, there are other characters like Nightblood or Lightsong that are in this book, and from what it sounds like talking to other people and hearing other people talk about this book, those are their favorite characters from this book. And I do enjoy those characters, but they're not my favorite by any means. I really can't say that I love them as much as everybody else tends to. I like Nightblood more for what it is rather than the personality itself. Lightsong is interesting, but I find his high priest, Larimar I believe is his name, to actually be more interesting than Lightsong is, which is strange that that's the case, but maybe not too strange in some ways. But then there's also the politics. I think that they're pretty well done here. I do tend to enjoy in-world politics, so it's not surprising that I find that aspect of this book interesting. But the whole Court of the Gods and then the storylines of the various gods themselves and what they're there for and what they're trying to do is interesting to me. And the more you find out and understand about the Court of the Gods, about the world, about how the returned work and all that kind of stuff, the more interesting that becomes. At least to me who likes in-world politics. And then once again, the more you learn about the Cosmere, the more you are trying to fit things into place. Of course, that happens with all Cosmere books, so it's not exclusive or special to this specific to Warbreaker. But this one more so for me in many ways, because I initially read it when I was still pretty early in my Cosmere journey, and I didn't really understand nearly as much as I do now about the Cosmere. Even still, my knowledge and understanding of the Cosmere is fairly small, but I have a greater grasp of it than I did the first time I read this book. I don't know what about this book caused me to think back on it so much the first time I read it. Even after rereading it, I'm still not sure what it was that caused me to do that as much as I did. And I do think my rating for it is lower upon this reread, but I still enjoyed this book well enough, and I'm glad that I did the reread, if for nothing else than to be able to now review it, which of course that's beneficial for me as a booktuber who focuses on reviewing books on my channel. It's important for me to have books to review, but also just so I can understand its place in the Cosmere better. And so for those two things, I really am happy to have reread this book. And I do like the book, I do enjoy reading the book, but it is not my favorite anymore, if it ever was. The other thing, I do really like the cover. I know some people don't like the cover, but I like the cover on this one. And since I never think to do it, jacket art by Daniel Dos Santos. So that is my review for Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys again soon. Stay warm.